"We're updating our will," my parents announced at dinner. Mom set down her wine glass with that satisfied smile she got when she'd organized something important. "Meeting with our lawyer tomorrow." "Finally," I said, twirling my pasta. "You've been talking about that for years." My boyfriend Garrett, who'd been quietly cutting his chicken, looked up. "That's great. Estate planning is important." Dad pulled out a business card from his wallet, sliding it across the table. "Found him through the Richardsons. Supposed to be the best in the business. Very discreet, very thorough." Garrett picked up the card. I watched his face change, that subtle shift when something wasn't right. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mitchell Graves, estate planning attorney," I read over his shoulder. "Sounds professional enough." "That's not a lawyer," Garrett said quietly. Dad laughed, that booming sound that usually meant he thought someone was being ridiculous. "Of course he is. The Richardsons have been using him for years. Just updated their whole estate plan." "No," Garrett said, pulling out his phone. "I know exactly who this is." The mood at the table shifted. Mom's smile faltered. "What do you mean?" Garrett typed rapidly, then turned his phone toward us. A news article filled the screen. The headline made my stomach drop. "Former funeral director sentenced to 20 years for massive estate fraud scheme." The photo showed the same man from the business card, except in an orange jumpsuit. "That's impossible," Dad said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "This says Malcolm Fitzgerald. The card says Mitchell Graves." "Same person," Garrett said, scrolling down. "Look at the scar above his left eye. The crooked nose. He was released 6 months ago. Guess he's back in business." Mom had gone pale. "But the Richardsons." I grabbed Garrett's phone, reading frantically. Malcolm Fitzgerald had run a funeral home in Phoenix for 15 years. During that time, he'd befriended grieving families, gained their trust, and systematically drained their estates. He'd posed as a lawyer, a financial advisor, even a grief counselor. Whatever it took to get access to money and assets. He stole over $12 million, I read aloud. Convinced elderly clients to sign over power of attorney. Forged wills. Even sold properties while the owners were still alive. "The Richardsons," Mom repeated, her voice smaller now. "Oh my God, Janet hasn't returned my calls in 2 weeks." Garrett was already dialing. "I'm calling my friend at the FBI. He works in financial crimes." "FBI?" Dad stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. "Let's not overreact, Dash. Mr. Davidson, when did this lawyer first contact you?" Garrett asked, switching to speakerphone as it rang. "He didn't contact us. We contacted him through." Dad trailed off, looking at Mom. "Through that estate planning seminar," Mom finished. "At the community center. He was the featured speaker." My blood ran cold. "Mom, how much information did you give him?" "Just basic stuff. Assets, accounts, insurance policies." She pressed her hand to her mouth. "Oh God, I gave him our social security numbers. For the paperwork," he said. Garrett's FBI friend picked up. Within minutes, he'd connected us to the right department. Within an hour, 2 agents were sitting in our living room. "Mitchell Graves doesn't exist," Agent Sullivan confirmed, comparing the business card to photos on her tablet. "This is definitely Malcolm Fitzgerald. He's violated his parole just by presenting himself as an attorney." "Have you signed anything?" her partner, Agent Martinez, asked. Dad shook his head. "We were supposed to tomorrow." "Don't. And whatever you do, don't answer if he calls. We need to know how many people he's targeting." Mom was typing on her phone. "The Richardsons, the Nakamuras, the Perezes, at least 12 families from our country club went to that seminar." Agent Sullivan's expression darkened. "We need those names. All of them." The next 24 hours were a blur. The FBI set up a discrete operation. They discovered Fitzgerald had rented an office under his fake name, complete with fake diplomas on the wall. He'd been operating for 3 months, targeting wealthy retirees through free estate planning seminars. The Richardsons, it turned out, had already signed papers. So had 6 other families. He was smart, Agent Martinez explained during a follow-up visit. The documents looked legitimate, had all the right language. But buried in the fine print were provisions that would have given him control over everything upon death or incapacitation. "Or incapacitation?" I repeated, feeling sick. "His previous scheme included causing accidents," Agent Sullivan said grimly. 3 of his victims in Phoenix had sudden falls or medication mix-ups that left them unable to manage their affairs. Mom gripped Dad's hand. "We almost." "You didn't," Garrett said firmly. "That's what matters." The FBI moved fast. They arrested Fitzgerald the next morning when he arrived at his fake office. He had appointments with 3 families that day, including my parents. During the raid, they found detailed files on over 40 families. Photos of homes, lists of assets, medical information. He'd been building profiles, determining who was worth targeting and how. Our file was thick. Photos of our house from every angle. Dad's recent retirement announcement from the company newsletter. Mom's volunteer work at the hospital, noting which wing she worked in, the one with terminal patients. Even information about me, that I lived in another state and only visited monthly. He was looking for isolation, Agent Martinez explained. Families where the adult children weren't around much. Where health issues might make someone vulnerable. You fit his profile perfectly. Except for one thing, Agent Sullivan added, nodding at Garrett. He didn't count on someone recognizing him. The investigation revealed the scope of Fitzgerald's new operation. The families who'd already signed documents had unknowingly agreed to transfer significant assets to a shell company upon their deaths. 2 had even signed documents giving him medical power of attorney if they became incapacitated. Mrs. Nakamura had surgery scheduled next month, Mom whispered during one of the meetings. Routine, but still. The thought hung in the air. How easy it would have been for something to go wrong. For Fitzgerald to step in as her legal representative while she was vulnerable. The trial was swift. Fitzgerald pled guilty to violating parole, fraud, and attempted elder abuse. The judge gave him life without parole, noting his unconscionable targeting of vulnerable seniors, and the likelihood he'd continue if ever released. The families he'd targeted formed a support group. Some had lost money in his previous schemes through friends or relatives. Others were just shaken by how close they'd come. He was so convincing, Mr. Richardson said during one meeting. So caring. Said he specialized in protecting family wealth from nursing home costs. He knew exactly what to say, Mrs. Perez added. Talked about protecting our legacy for our children. My parents were lucky. They lost nothing but their sense of security. Others weren't as fortunate. The Nakamuras had already transferred $200,000 to one of Fitzgerald's shell companies, thinking they were setting up a trust. The FBI recovered some of it, but not all. How did you know? Dad asked Garrett one evening, months after everything had settled. Most people wouldn't have recognized him from an old news photo. Garrett was quiet for a moment. My grandmother was one of his victims in Phoenix. Not directly, she used his funeral home for my grandfather. He convinced her to prepay for her own funeral, then stole the money. She found out when she was diagnosed with cancer and tried to update her arrangements. I took his hand. He'd never told me this part. She died thinking she'd be a burden, he continued. That we'd have to scramble to pay for her funeral because she'd been foolish enough to trust him. We told her it was fine, that we'd handle it, but she never forgave herself. I'm sorry, Mom said softly. She would be glad, Garrett said. Knowing that recognizing him stopped him from hurting more families. That something good came from her loss. My parents did eventually update their will, with a real attorney, one whose credentials Garrett personally verified. They also became advocates for elder fraud protection, sharing their story at community centers and retirement homes. If it sounds too good to be true, Dad would tell audiences, it probably is. And always verify credentials. Don't be embarrassed to be cautious. Be embarrassed if you're not. Mom would add, and listen to your family. We almost dismissed our daughter's boyfriend's concerns because we thought we knew better. Thank God we didn't. The Richardsons recovered most of their money. The Nakamuras got about half. Others who'd been victimized by Fitzgerald's previous schemes received some restitution from assets the FBI seized. But the real victory was stopping him before he could fully execute his plan. Before fake wills could be activated. Before accidents could happen. Before families could be destroyed by someone who saw grief and vulnerability as opportunities. You saved us, my parents would tell Garrett every time they saw him. You saved yourselves, he'd reply. You listened. You acted. You didn't let pride or embarrassment stop you from getting help. But I knew the truth. If Garrett hadn't recognized that face, if he hadn't remembered a news article from years ago, if he hadn't spoken up at that dinner table, my parents might have walked into that office the next day and signed their lives away. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes it's not about what you know, but who remembers. Sometimes a family dinner conversation can be the difference between safety and catastrophe. My parents keep Garrett's FBI friend's business card in their kitchen drawer now, right next to their real lawyer's information. A reminder that vigilance is the price of security. That trusting your gut, or your daughter's boyfriend's gut, can save everything. The fake business card, Mitchell Graves, estate planning attorney, sits in an FBI evidence locker somewhere. A small piece of cardstock that almost destroyed dozens of lives. Proof that predators don't always look dangerous. Sometimes they look helpful. Sometimes they look professional. Sometimes they look like exactly what you need. Until someone who knows better takes a closer look. Until someone says, "That's not a lawyer." Until someone listens.